I'm Kim Weeks, and I want to welcome everybody who's beginning to log in to this next iteration of Yoga Lineages, which I am hosting on my platform Weeks Well, and is also being folded into a podcast project that I've just launched a few days ago called Practicing Well. We're going to give you a lot of links for today's conversation. We've just found out in the prep talk with Doug Keller, who's joining me today, that you'll also get some slides and some other types of media as you learn in this conversation, which is the next, installment of what we're trying to do on this platform, what I'm trying to do in my conversations about yoga lineage and what it is and why or whether it matters. And so I'm going to introduce Doug in just a moment as people are settling in for the call. But I want to welcome all of you who have joined us live today, as well as the many others I'm welcoming on recording or through the podcast in our re-release, because we'll have the visual conversation on YouTube for a while and then the podcast as well. It'll come sometime later this fall. Before we get started, I want to run through a couple of quick housekeeping items because, as we are finding in this evolution of the Yoga Lineages conversation, which started in 2020, we have still the people who love to log in live and get the chance to ask live questions and get live answers from our guests. Whereas more and more people are logging in, tuning in after the fact. So we still wind up having several hundred people logging in for these conversations in their various ways with whatever, convenience is for them. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions because I am interested in you all and live, and those of you who are listening on recording, if you want to let us know your answer to these questions, feel free to email us at hello@weekswell. So we want to know how you heard about the event today. You'll just see this question come up on the screen. Was it through the Weeks Well newsletter? Was it another newsletter, some other outlet? You can answer that. Thank you. Oh, good. Are you where you're logging in from is the next thing we're sort of interested in. You're still answering this first question. So the next one that comes up is where you're logging in from. This is a new question, because we're really curious if the audience is as global as we think it is. The kinds of questions and conversations we get would indicate that, especially the ones we had on the Yoga Alliance platform as well. Okay, great. Doug, you're such an international presence. I was expecting that we'd see people from all over the place logging in today. And then finally, we're interested in if you are affiliated with any lineage, which one is it? So that's the next question coming up. If you're, certainly if there's an other in there, that's totally fine. We're just interested in what one you do affiliate with, what one is one that you call home, basically. Okay. And then I'll just kind of move on as you continue to answer this last question. We're always really interested in the live questions. What comes up dynamically for people as they're listening in the conversation is so interesting, because for all we know, you're on a walk or you're pulling out books from your library, like John Schumacher did in the very first Yoga Lineages conversation we had. On this conversation, he was showing, pictures that he wanted us to see. And so you can feel free to log in on the questions, on the Q&A. Oh, yes, I will share the questions to answer to the lineage connections. I just got that question. It looks to me like we have 26 people affiliated with Ashtanga Yoga, 5% with Integral, 11 Iyengar, 11% Kripalu, and 5% Vini Yoga. That's who we have today. And again, we have so many more people logging in, to the podcast or to the YouTube or whatever. So it's unclear whether or not that skew would be the same. But anyway, please ask us questions on the Q&A. That's your one-way street to us. And our one-way street to you is through the chat, where we'll be offering all kinds of links that Doug brings up. Terminology, we try very hard to get the Sanskrit to you in translation so that you can continue to sort of keep pace with the conversation. What I learned in my pre-call from Doug, as I scribbled notes furiously, is that there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot coming into this, if you will, linear conversation that we're having today about yoga lineage and why it matters. So you'll see several links coming through from my producer, Alyssa, who I want to thank for helping us throw this event and put it on. She's the producer also for my podcast. And then finally, hi, Doug. How are you? It's so good to see you. And I'm so glad you're here. I am thinking about the, oh my gosh, 2018 something years ago that I would truck out to your studio in Reston, Virginia from DC to take classes, and that Wednesday 10:30 class.
Yeah,
and you know, it was such a great class. And so what Doug has, what he's doing today is coming from a place originally of meditation. He started yoga as a graduate teacher, of philosophy. He got a graduate degree in philosophy and then wound up teaching it, and found himself in a yoga ashram in Yoga Siddha, Siddha Yoga in New York, and then ultimately in India. And then from there, spent some time in the Anusara tradition, or we might call lineage. I'm very interested in discussing that, Doug, somewhat. So there's a lot that Doug has to say, coming, not dissimilarly to Richard Freeman's sort of philosopher approach, although what we see from Doug is an actual official philosophy degree that will be infusing our conversation today on what yoga is and why it matters. And I'm going to let you, Doug, please just outline the 3 things you'd like to talk about today so that we can all kind of settle in and get kind of accustomed and used to how it is we're going to talk today. Again, we will have some, Doug has a couple of slides he may show to help make this conversation clearer for you, and feel free to ask questions as we go. But as I hand it over to you, Doug, one of the things that struck me the most in my classes with you was one of the first things you said when Kristen, Crash, and I came to that class. We came every single week for at least a year. Was, I can't believe you drive all this way to come study with me. And it's the kind of thing that I say to my students too, because it sort of opens up the question of, who am I as a teacher, and what authority can I establish, or what authority do I have to draw you to me? At least that's how I heard it even then. And today it still sticks with me because I find it such an interesting way that you approach teaching and approach the pedagogy of yoga. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here, and tell us everything you think.
Thank you, Kim. Hi. Yeah, actually, I remember last time we got together was at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I was coming down to DC to do a podcast, a radio podcast with you, and as the whole city of DC was just absolutely empty, like it was from some sort of movie or something like that, with shops open, to get food here and there. But yeah, it's been quite a ride in between. I also remember like with you coming to classes and other people, I've had the experience over time, which is kind of like a little bit of experience of lineage, because I studied with Iyengar teachers and still do online. I take some classes with a teacher I know from the 1990s. And when I'm doing workshops, people would come up and they'd say, I like your class, but I'm in the Iyengar school, so don't tell anybody I'm here. Like it was some kind of, like compromising themselves to do that, which is kind of why it's good to talk about lineages. And like you were saying, I wanted to lay out the basic 3 points that I wanted to look at today. First is to get more clarity about the idea of lineage in relationship to yoga, and particularly keep in mind what is the yoga that we practice, because most of us coming online, and I was looking at the list of styles that you had from the questionnaire, most of us are practicing hatha yoga in some form. Some of those on the list tended to be a little bit more meditation oriented, but by and large, we're talking about people who practice hatha yoga. And that's something to keep in mind, because we are dealing with different kinds of yoga. I mean, yoga as a general term is qualified by what comes before it. And so when you say I teach hatha yoga, you're doing yoga through the practices of hatha. If you're doing jnana yoga, you're practicing yoga through the practices of knowledge are coming to know, karma yoga, and so on and so forth. And so we want to look at the lineage that really speaks to the practice that we're doing. And like I said, get some clarity about what we mean about lineage. Second point, the reason why we even talk about lineage, why we bother to go into it, is that lineage is also a claim to authority. And that's been an interesting conversation throughout the history of yoga, people making different claims to authority over the primacy of the teachings that they follow over other forms. So I'm going to get a little bit into the history of that. And then the third point is, again, coming back, if we're a practitioner of Hatha Yoga, what aspects of lineage are really appropriate to the yoga that we're practicing.